In November of 2021, I was traveling from Philly to Las Vegas to compete in a jiu-jitsu tournament. I traveled the country a fair amount, and I would normally stay with whichever teams were also competing as a way to save money. This time though, for various reasons, I had to stay alone. I booked an Airbnb not far from the Vegas Strip. I did so kind of hastily, and didn't realize that the neighborhood wasn't the greatest. I thought of canceling and booking something else, but went against my instincts and rationalized that it was close to everything I needed, and I wouldn't be spending much time there anyway. I got to the location and didn't see the host. I wouldn't know who to look for anyway, since the Airbnb profile picture was of a flower. The host gave me the key code to the room I was staying in, a small studio apartment that shared a wall with the host's house. There was only one door in and out of the studio. The first red flag was that the key code for the lock on the door was 1234567. I thought that was weird, but the password for the Wi-Fi was password, so I figured that the host was just an older person who wasn't tech savvy, and the reviews for the room were pretty good. Around 9:30 p.m. is when things got creepy. I was close to falling asleep when I heard a tapping on the window in front of my bed where I was laying down. There were drapes covering the window, so I couldn't see who was making the noise. I responded by saying, "Huh?" loud enough for whoever it was to hear me. A minute or two went by in silence before I heard the tapping on the window once again. I said hello pretty loud and it went away. I was pretty on edge at this point and immediately wrote a message to the host asking if it was them tapping on the window. About an hour went by before they finally responded saying, "I was going to bring you some water, but it seemed like you were asleep, so I left." I was still very much on edge and I knew I wasn't going to be able to sleep. I contemplated going for a walk to the store or taking a shower just to clear my mind, but something told me to just sit tight and wait to see what happens. About 45 minutes went by. It's about midnight at this point, and I heard some noise outside. I then heard the distinct sound of someone trying the key code on my door. The attempt failed, but I could hear them trying again. This time I heard the sound of the lock disengaging. The door was unlocked. I threw the blankets off of me and ran to the door as it was opening up towards me and slammed it shut in this person's face. I was yelling, "This is my room, get out of here, leave." They responded in a deep voice from the other side of the door, "Madel said this is my room." Madel was the name of the host. I kept responding with what I said before and called the cops. I spoke loud enough so they knew I was on the phone with the police. Police eventually came and were not surprised at all by the story I told them. They said they would hang around until I called an Uber to leave. The host was very combative and unapologetic. Their alibi for who that person was changed multiple times. When the Uber arrived, I jumped in and felt relieved to be getting out of there. It still creeps me out that I never saw the person who was opening my door. I have a feeling that it was some kind of setup. If the host knew I was flying in from the East Coast, the 9:30 p.m. tapping on the window would have been equivalent to my 12:30 a.m., and the invasion would be about 3 a.m. Maybe it would have just been a robbery, but it could have been much worse. My boyfriend Sean and I went on a trip to Vermont in the summer of 2016. I booked us a stay in an Airbnb that was listed as off-grid cabin. It had a few hundred reviews with a 5-star rating, so I didn't think it looked sketchy. The cabin was an old, one-room cabin with a potbelly stove and a loft area. There was no electricity and it was in a remote part of Vermont down an old dirt road. There was one house about half a mile away that was owned by the host and she was away, so we were alone. We got there around 4 p.m. and had a really nice evening cooking dinner and playing board games by candlelight. We had hiked all day and were exhausted by 10, so I went up to the loft to sleep while my boyfriend decided to sit outside and smoke. About 20 minutes later, while I was in that space between deep sleep and consciousness, I was jolted awake by a large banging sound on the side of the cabin. Before I could yell down, Sean yelled up to me asking if that was me. Confused and feeling like I must be dreaming, I groggily yelled, "No, was that you?" He said no, but didn't seem too worried since he was sitting outside and didn't see anyone. We go camping frequently, so it takes a lot for us to get freaked out by random noises in the night. We figured it was probably a tree branch that broke off and fell against the cabin. I started to fall asleep again when there was another loud bang, like a thwacking sound from another part of the cabin. At this, I jumped out of bed and climbed down from the loft. I met Sean as he was coming through the door. He told me to grab all the sharp things that I could find and go back into the loft. He was putting on a calm demeanor, but I could tell he was a little freaked out. I asked him what he thought it was, and he cautiously said that he didn't know. He said he didn't see anything when he was outside, but he thought he might have heard footsteps. As we were whispering, we heard a small, slow scraping noise that trailed for about 3 feet against the wall of the cabin, then silence again. I was pretty scared at this point and didn't know what to do. Our car was parked about 100 feet away from the cabin, so we would have to face whatever was out there in the dark in order to get to it, which is probably what they wanted. I was also afraid that if this was a human, that they might have done something like slash the tires or block our ability to get back down the driveway. Sean told me to stay very quiet and go back up to the loft while he sat downstairs and waited. He had a hunting knife and a large stick, and I had a few steak knives, but otherwise we were sitting ducks. The downstairs of the cabin had huge windows on 3 walls, half of which were just screens, so if someone was outside, they could easily be watching us, or could slash through the screen to get inside. I wanted to stay downstairs, but Sean ordered me to go upstairs, saying that it would be easier to fight this guy without me there if it came to that. I went up and sat in the middle of the bed, clutching an array of knives in my fists. I don't think I ever listened so intently before. Sean yelled out hello to see if he could get any response, or perhaps scare it away if it was an animal. We heard nothing for what felt like 20 minutes. Then the scraping sound came back, much louder, like someone was dragging a rake or a hoe across the side of the cabin. I heard clear, methodical footsteps trailing off around the side of the cabin. Sean then came up to the loft and pulled the ladder up. He said he didn't like how they could see him, but he couldn't see them, and if they came in the cabin, he could at least get the jump on them from up here. We sat on the bed in silence. I was looking at him in terror. It was probably around midnight at this point, and I realized that we were going to be stuck in that cabin until morning. The noises continued and intensified. There was more banging that seemed to be coming from all different sides of the cabin. Intermittently, the scraping returned. This could not have been an animal. The sounds were too methodical, and we didn't hear any grunting like there was a bear or bobcat. And there were constant footsteps, pacing footsteps. There was a clear crunch of one foot going in front of the other all around the sides of the cabin. There would be pauses of 10 to 20 minute intervals. Then it would all start up again. At one point there was a strange rattling sound on the outside, like someone was trying to shake or climb the pipe on the outside of the cabin that fed into the potbelly stove. This carried on for hours. Sean and I just laid in that bed, paralyzed in silent fear, staring into each other's terrified faces. I kept waiting to hear the front door burst open or the screen window rip. I was convinced that we were both about to be murdered, and every gruesome possibility kept playing in my head. I have never been that terrified, but no one ever came into the cabin. We never heard any voices, whispers, deranged giggling, or anything. Just the loud scraping, banging, rattling, and footsteps. Finally, around 5 in the morning, we started to hear roosters in the distance, and the loft was slowly lit by early dawn light. The sounds finally stopped. I got about 2 hours of sleep, because we had to drive into Pennsylvania later that day. My car was thankfully fine, and we packed everything up as quickly as possible to get the heck out of there. Sean looked around the cabin, trying to find scraping marks or clear footprints, but there was nothing. I messaged the Airbnb host to tell her about our experience, and she said it must have been a porcupine. If you could find a porcupine that makes loud banging noises and can walk like a human, let me know. To this day, we debate about what it could have been. Sean thinks it was a crazy local trying to scare us away. Either way, I'm really glad I was not murdered that night.